Should I brush my hair?
You know what I tell Ashwin, right? What hair? No, I'm sorry.
That's
That's
what,
the
that's
he
what
said
I'm
the
saying.
same thing to me. You know, he goes, I'm going to go get a haircut. I said, what hair?
Okay, Chairman, you could start.
All right. So we live now? Yes.
Yes.
Good evening, everyone. Today is the January 25th AHRB meeting. Tonight we have one item on the agenda, which is 156 Palisades. And, we can go right into it. Well, actually, we have only one item, so you know, why don't we get to it? It's Patty, David.
Patty, can you hear us?
And you can now see me.
Yes.
Hey, Patty.
Do you want me to promote Michael Lang as well?
Sure.
So as a form of intro to our board members, this is 156 Palisades, and we've been working, the applicants has been working with the planning board in determining the scope, say the proposal. Patty and David have been working in developing the scheme and trying to comply with the design guidelines and criteria that were discussed by the planning board. Last planning board meeting, Patty asked us if we can have like a intro to the state of affairs, so to prepare for a joint meeting with the planning board, which is I believe it's on February 4th. Jennifer, confirm me if I'm wrong. That joint meeting of the architectural review board with the planning board. And this presentation is basically to bring us up to speed on where things are, and if you have any comments for the applicants to elaborate, or what is our board opinion to the presentation. So go ahead. Is that okay? Is it fair? Is a fair presentation, fair intro?
Ideal. You hit all the right things. Do you want me to share the screen?
Please.
Okay, let's see if I can do it. So can you see things starting to show up? Can you see it?
Yep.
Yeah.
That's excellent. I'll just do a quick intro on this and kind of let David explain what he's come up with, which I think is quite good. We've been working on this for quite a long time. I think you guys all know where the site is. It's down at Palisades. Palisades is an unusual street. I think Ayer and Rob and Steve Brosnahan have had a lot of fun analyzing that street and trying to figure out its characteristics. And they've done they've developed guidelines for the street, which I think is quite interesting. And it's very different than some of the existing zoning. Some of it's more restrictive, some of it's more accommodating, but it's all directed towards the idea of making this street continue to have the positive character it has, while also recognizing the need for many of these older buildings to be fixed up, and for some of them, as in this case, to be replaced. This is a sketch that David developed that was presented to the planning board at their December meeting. This was, it had a lot of similarities to where we were, but it took a point of departure, and it created some very different massing ideas that I think the planning board was much more comfortable with than what we have been showing before. A lot of the stuff is actually quite similar, but it is different, and I think the differences are what made the planning board be enthusiastic. We evolved it further with some things that for the next meeting. This was actually direct response to some of the comments we got at the December meeting. But once the planning board saw it, I think they had a feeling that some of the idea of putting this roof, having a pitched roof on this side, all that does is make the building bigger. So where we are now is we've gone back to the idea of the flat roof on this side, shed roofs, breaking up the roofs, a large sloping roof that comes down to a 2-story height on the front. And this portion of the building, as we can show you with some of the other stuff, is set back very far from the street. And the garage door itself is in the plane of that back wall, but it's actually under the decks that project out on that side. So it's concealed. There was some confusion at the planning board when they saw this. They were wondering, how do you drive into the garage door if it's half below the street? But that's a ramp coming back at the steepest slope that we think we can do. And we've had some very good input from some of the people on this call, as well as others, with the idea of how to treat the front in a way that felt like it addressed the street, it was active to the street, but also accommodated. One of the things that we were looking for was that the building would be fully ADA compliant and convenient for people coming off the sidewalk, basically using a ramp to get into the building, because this building does have an elevator. I don't know if there's other stuff that you want me to go through. I mean, do you have specific questions about it, or you want me, like, I guess it's, we're thinking.
Why don't you, Patty, present an overview?
Okay.
And then we'll engage into some sort of conversation.
Yep.
As we all understand, this is going to be a continuation.
Yeah.
And then, this is to get out, this Palisade application, it's an interesting one because of its location, and it's critical, and deserves review and discussion. But yeah, please.
From the site plan, I can kind of lay out a couple of the things that were discussed in the guidelines. One is having an active transition zone between the public zone and the private zone. So this is quasi-public. It's obviously on the property, but it's open to the community. It also sets the building back so it doesn't feel like it's one large mass facing the street. The portion that's closest to the street is 24 feet wide. Then it sets back to being 39.5 feet wide at this portion of it. And one of the guidelines is trying to have that not exceed 40. And then this other section, which sets back about 46 feet from the street, that is what brings the volume out to be a total of 56.5 feet. But then that same reverse, the way that Z works, this portion projects out in the back. That's also about 24.5 feet wide. So you don't have, the buildings are over here are looking at something that's not one large mass, that they have to deal with. Here's that ramp going down to the garage. Here's one set of decks for the 3 units on this side and another deck over here for the 3 units on that side. We also have an active front porch, a gathering space at the top of the stairs, top of the ramp. Next, I think, we've got a garage below the building, basically below ground. I mean, the dirt is actually on top of this portion of the garage. It's buried. This is a 6-car garage. We're required to have a total of 9 parking spaces. We have 6 on site, and we have 3 curbside as allowed by the fact that we had an existing 2-family with no parking on site. And of course, we also have the parking lot across the street that has quite a bit of open space. This plan shows 3 units on the ground floor. We're going back and forth of whether it should be 3 1-bedrooms on the first floor or 2 2-bedrooms. The second floor has 2 2-bedrooms. The third floor has 2 2-bedrooms. As I said, elevator and stairs. And this plan shows getting access to the flat roof on top, where you'd be able to have a really nice view out to the river. This is the front elevation that you already saw, the side elevations, and the back elevation. These are all designs that will get a lot more detail as they evolve. But it was something that fits with a lot of the ideas that the design guidelines identified. And this is kind of this is a drawing we've been working with a long time, that shows kind of what the massing is as you go down the street. If you look at these 3 buildings, the way that they're right next to each other, it's part of what's trying to influence us on breaking this thing up so it doesn't feel like it's a single building that is 56.5 feet wide. It's more like an assemblage of buildings, although this building down the street is a pretty big block of a building, which everyone seems to like a lot. There's coverage issues on this. The building itself, we're at 34.8. The target was 32.8, but the planning board seems to be willing to work with us on that. The coverage is in it, the building itself, total building is 42%, including the garage below ground. The idea was to be 60% on that, but we've got walkways and terraces and things like that. If they want us to cut that stuff back, we can, but we're able to handle all the stormwater on site. So I don't think there's any real reason to want to do that. For example, we've got a sidewalk that goes to the back, which, is a nice usable area. It's a place where kids could play, living in the building, and, it gives a softer feel around the neighborhood. And David, do you want to talk about these, or do you want me to talk about these?
Sure, I can talk about it. As Patty's mentioned, the building is what we did was we took 2 volumes and 2 equal volumes, and just basically set of three apartments in one, 3 apartments in the other, and then just pushed one back, pushed one back and brought one forward, and so that we could just have 2 equal volumes, and then articulate one of the volumes that are right up along the street, the more the street face, so that it's more congruent with the smaller increments of buildings that you have along the street. Obviously, the volumes vary along the street, but we try to equate it more towards the smaller, more vernacular, less apartment building, more big house. And then the main way you get up and down the building into the building is a seam between the 2 volumes. And so as you saw in the first attempt, the tall volume was a stairs, and so we split it open so that you enter between the volume of the mass of the apartments, and then the mass of the stairs, which we can bring down because of the nature of the stairs. And so we were able to push that all back, and then articulate the 2 separately. And so that might we went to a flat roof instead of a slope roof, partially to also accommodate a roof deck as well. But it also, the overall height is actually lower. So, those 2 volumes might maybe articulate it differently with materials eventually. And so they would be seen as, it's one building, but it's actually a amalgamation of 2 essentially. So so you can see that in the massing as you go around the building, you can see the kind of the 2 distinct volumes and how each are treated differently.
So that's pretty much what we brought to show you. What comments?
Well, let me before I jump in, I would like to invite Brandon and Deepti to comment, because I believe this is the first time that they see it, and I'm curious they see this scheme that evolved quite a lot from the last time that you presented to us. So I'm curious to have Brandon and Deepti's comments first, and then I'll try to organize a conversation. So Brandon, Deepti, you're welcome to pitch in.
Who wants to go first?
Go ahead, Brandon.
Yeah, I remember the previous concepts, and just in looking at this one, for some reason, and when I look at it in elevation, and even in some of the views that are part of this, it just seems that front, it just seems very, I understand the concept of trying to break it up into 2 masses of equal volume and things of that nature. Just the roof lines and everything on the Palisade side, it seems very complicated to me, just in terms of, in comparison to some of the other structures on the street. And I know the play on roof lines and what you're trying to accomplish, but I'm having a hard time just kind of understanding how all those, what look like all these little pieces and blocks on top of each other with different roof lines kind of work with each other. So I've seen the different iterations in some respect, just not this one, so to speak. But I think that's kind of my initial reaction to it when that's my first take. So.
Yeah, I feel pretty much the same way as Brandon does. I think that it's a good effort, Patty, to what it used to be. I'm certainly glad that you're trying to cut down on the mass. However, it just seems like, and I understand what you're trying to do with doing the two separate elements on that, so we don't have a large volume of the same thing. However, it just seems like there's like a mishmash of too many things and too many elements going on. I'm sure, as Yair pointed out earlier, that possibly, as you evolve with the design, it might settle down a little bit. That's the best word I can find.
That's a good word.
I don't know, David, if you have more thoughts on that. It just seems like, even though the two volumes are supposed to be completely independent in terms of, what they're doing, it's just like too many different styles, too many different roofs without it having any, it's not seamless.
Can I jump in, Dipti?
I'm actually here as well. I don't know.
Oh, Paul, how are you? I didn't see you.
Sorry about that. Sorry, I was like a couple minutes late, so I apologize.
Okay, but you managed to review the application.
Yes, I did. And again, I'm sorry for interrupting, but I just wanted to give in my 2 cents. And I actually am exactly in line with what Brandon and Dipti both said. One of my pet peeves with architecture right now is sometimes a building, particularly when it's a larger building, they try to give it this kind of fake character by breaking it up into different forms. Now, this isn't as bad as some of the worst examples. Where, where like the I think on Terrytown, where they do the completely different style townhouses next to another. To give it this kind of new.
Careful, I'm a trustee member of Terrytown.
Oh, sorry, but it's
trustee. He's not. He can't be blamed for anything yet.
I actually like this building. I like the shape of it quite a bit, and I really like where you're going with it. And I actually don't know if it's in violation of that kind of impulse that I have against that kind of how I don't like that kind of disparity of style where you're just trying a little too hard to break it up.
Yeah.
So essentially, I'm just saying the same thing that Dipti said. If there's some way we could just kind of make it tie into each other. And make it a little more uniform, whether that's material or roof lines or whatever else. But I think where you're going is I really like where you're going with it.
Just a really quick reaction to that is we, of course, when we started this, we had very homogeneous materials, which was one of the comments that we got that was negative. And the idea was if we could break it up so it appeared to be more a couple of buildings together than one single building. So that's what the impetus on that is. I mean, obviously, if all of everything facing the street was brick instead of brick and then stucco, brick and clapboard, whatever that other material is going to be, that would tie it together a lot. If I just ignore everything to the right of this line, this is very simple.
Yeah, no, I like it.
That I think
it's just an example of not being able to please everybody,
right.
Because you're going to please someone by breaking it up. You're going to displease me by doing that. So it makes your job so hard.
Well, yeah, but if we start being kind of additive in this and say, okay, this is pretty nice as it works. This I don't have any problem with, that it's flat roof. It's kind of it's meant to recede and not be the same thing. I think all of the energy that we're talking about is probably the roof on the stairs and how this area works. If that gets calmer and melds itself more into this, I think that it could just feel much simpler. I like the idea of the shed roofs, breaking that. It's something that we were given, there are many examples of that on the street, but that's something we can certainly look at. And I thought the idea, settling it down, as Dipti said, I think that's a good way to look at it. It's got a little bit more energy right now than it wants, than works. And it doesn't need, this is not a building that should be energetic and calling a lot of attention to itself. If it's successful, you'd end up doing a second or third take on it. It would be your second or third time looking at it. You'd say, actually, this background building that seems to just fit in with everything else actually has a lot of interesting ideas going on in it. But right now, I do think it feels like it's calling a little bit too much attention. But I really believe that that's just this area in here. I think if we can settle that down, I think it starts to come together.
You're right, Patty. I agree with you. And I have one more question to ask you. Is there any way you can get rid of the ramp by putting in a half level on the elevator?
I can do that really well. I've got the drawings all for it. We presented it to the planning board in November. They didn't like the idea. What we did is we actually had this side being the entrance coming in a half story different, so you could come in directly from the street. But
what about going in where you have the steps so that you go straight in, and then don't you have the stairs and the elevator through the middle portion there where the steps are?
Yeah, but the floor of this structure, that's the minimum floor we can be. We wouldn't be able to walk in at this level and have it really work with the garage below.
Yep, it's in terms of the levels. I was the one who I had looked at the half level that Patty had designed in the last iteration, and I thought it was overly complicated because
it costs a lot, because I looked at that for another building to do a half level.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand.
It's very expensive too.
Well, it wasn't necessarily I think it goes to the cost, obviously, but it was overly complicated in terms of you're splitting up. In the previous iteration, it was split up into a whole portion of the building was split up into a half. Everything was half level, and so I could see it doing. You might be able to do half level in one location, but the thing is that typically in residential construction, in residential structures, what I tend to do is to raise the level of the first floor up above the walking surface, so that you're kind of walking up. You're transitioning from the public to the semi-public and then into the building. And mainly because this building is going to be, typically, on a house you would have a porch, but in a sense, this is a raised porch for the overall building. And personally, I would, the ramp going right in front of a balcony is not ideal. But I think that this is probably a better option than having people come right in and sort of. It's a sort of half and half that you often see in the 1970s or 80s buildings that are in New York City, where you actually have to go down into the ground and then go up, so.
Not only that, your building is just not big enough to be able to contain the half level. I'm with you, but I just wanted to find out if you had explored that.
Mm-hmm. And I agree that yes, there are three roofs that probably could be simplified a lot, and so that are right at that are, the stairs is articulated, and then we added the right as you go into the door inside and above it, it's kind of a taller story right there. That's why that little roof is back there. So that can be simplified.
All right. So can I jump in? First of all, thank you, David. Thank you, Patty. I think I agree with the general direction that this is an improvement from what we've seen like a few months ago, a couple of months ago. There are a few things that since I've been following this Palisade, the character of the Palisades street, uh, there are a lot of interesting findings, and they call it a mishmash, or they call it a mixed style. So many words. I think it's an interesting. Palisades an interesting work in progress. It kind of it's informed by a lot of forces that started with the village. It's one of the oldest streets, and absorbs a lot of um, patterns that are interesting. And this is one of the I would maybe I can say it's a mega block that goes from Cedar all the way to Chestnut. And from Main Street is kind of if you go on the Main Street side, it's like a continuous street, and it's a long and very interesting. And when it goes to the Palisades, kind of permeates, uh, you know, a more open feeling from the Hudson side. So it's a very interesting block, let's say. With that said, the corner building, I'm very happy to see that at least the reading of the front elevation is 3 floors. It's one of the things that we were discussing with Paddy at the very beginning was that the reading was about 4 or 5 floors. Now it's definitely 3 floors, and I welcome that. The other thing it's um, I'm very interested in the way that the transition zone between the public space and the private space is articulated. And actually, I kind of agree with the way that the ramp is proposed in the scheme, and it's because it's a pattern that follows all the way to the train station in this kind of linear or parallel access to the streets. Actually, I would argue that a nice stone retaining wall that hides the ramp behind could be a very successful feature in the scheme. And not only that, the main stairs that you kind of access it frontally, I personally will suggest to consider it if you approach it from let's say from this if the street is sloping from the high point in Cedar all the way to to down, and that picks up the handicap ramp. From the right, you can go up the stairs.
Right. I think that's really interesting. But when we show that as an alternative, I'm going to want you to be the one that explains it to Rob.
Yeah, of course. That's not a problem. The issue is that, for example, there is a wonderful set of stairs down the street.
Yeah.
But I guess it's a big stone retaining wall with a set of stairs that you go in, and then you go to right and left, right?
Yep.
There is a lot of character in that, and this, let's say, you call it a collective space or community space, which is from the private to the public. That area, if it's it's something that has, along with the landscape, along with the porches, along with a lot of these elements, can create something very interesting that is very pertinent to this particular location on the street. The way that I see this street is this Palisade Street, the long Palisade Street it's you can say that it's 3 sections. The bookends, Chestnut and Cedar. The middle that is more dense and have like buildings on the street line, on the lot line on the street, and then the middle ones that are, more setback with these porches, with these three-story character, etc., that which this building falls into it and starts to align with it, with the character. So this alignment to the guidelines, I think it's very positive. However, I guess I mentioned that. I mentioned the use of the flat roof, which is I welcome it. I think it's a flat roof can be used to to enjoy the magnificent views that you're going to have up there.
Yeah.
And why not? And can be animated with landscaping and has to be enjoyed. Why not? The issue of the two volumes, which I guess we discussed it in the past, Patty. I think it's a keeps a works perfectly. It's fine, but I think it's my problem is in the seam, not in the volumes.
Yeah.
The seam is not there. The core or the vertical circulation is not acting as a unifying of the two volumes. It's acting as part of the left volume, and receding and the receding volume acts totally different. It's still not a building. A building can be an assemblage, but
Yeah.
you want to have it as a building.
Yeah, when you said that, it made me wonder if the left and the right are the brick, and the middle is the one that's the different.
Correct.
I think
that's good. That could be a more of a seam.
Yeah.
And not only that, I don't know how open or close could be, and that's something that for you guys to explore more. And I think that even the fenestration or the openings or the windows can be more coherent, if that's the right word.
Okay.
Just to avoid the overload of
stuff.
That's another thing. The other thing that I'm not convinced at all is, I will say something. Don't take it wrong, but the scaffolding of the elements on the stairs, it looks more as an applied scaffold than a real balconies, and that could be an element that can be explored and developed more.
Sure.
But the way that it is now, it really looks like an applied scaffold. I don't know.
It's not intended as a finished product. For one thing, it would be the problem that wouldn't meet code. So it needs to, that needs to be developed in some way. I didn't want to start going like making it look very modern in articulation or traditional in articulation until we got further along in what we're doing, really make a decision of what direction this wants to go.
Correct, but for example, if you apply, you have the in the middle you have the element of the porch, and on the two sides you have a scaffold that works with a slope roof and a scaffold that works with it's kind of, I wouldn't say schizophrenic, but it is. It's kind of too not convinced, but it's really it is really an element that can be developed further and looked into it. What did I? Well, the rest of the comments I align with the board's comments in terms of roofing. There are all the four elevations are very dissimilar to one another. If you go 360 to the building, maybe it needs to be reconsidered. One, it looks like more. This looks like a school or like a utilitarian type of building, which there is nothing wrong with it. But when you turn, you go into a totally different animal.
Right.
And I think that a coherence has to be looked at, and especially also on the circulation. The circulation, I don't mind the simple massing, but make up your mind.
Right. I think the back could benefit from the same thing we were talking about in the front, and this becoming a seam that's got the two pieces, I think would make that happier. But I also think this being very utilitarian and functional is a real true nod to many of the buildings in this neighborhood. Some of the nicest buildings are incredibly simple, and they've just got the, the windows equally spaced, equally sized, all lined up, very, very simple, and maybe a little bit more articulation in the way the surface itself works. So
Just, all I'm saying is it has to be developed into it's a building with two volumes with a seam, but still it's one building.
Yep.
In terms of materials, I will disagree with anybody that says that if it's one building, materials have to be either complementing each other or homogeneous. I have nothing against homogeneous, an homogeneous direction to the materials. But again, until we don't see it, we can really comment on it. And I think if we treat the collective or the community space landscaped and really approach it, could be this. I'm glad that you brought down the scale of this building and et cetera, et cetera. The other thing that I will say is you're showing this image. The image as it is now, it shows like it kind of looks like a much bigger building than it is. Just for the sake of just the scale, the way it is, and it looks like even industrial building, which is really not. So scale and how to manage the elevations of the building is critical, because you see next to the buildings on Cedar, that building is not bigger, but it looks bigger.
Right. It's actually smaller.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, but it looks bigger. So that, I think that those are my comments, which in essence are aligned with everybody's. And in terms of lot coverage, and that I'll leave it for you and the planning board. I think I covered my.
I think that's really good. I mean, I think it's a lot of good ideas for us to kind of move to a next step. I don't know that we'll have that much done before the planning board meeting, or if it isn't even better for us to keep the design as it is for that meeting, so that we get to hear their comments before we're reworking stuff.
Well, you have 2 weeks. Maybe you can.
I have a week and a half, and do I go in with something totally different that resolves things to match you, and then they tell me everything in reverse? You need to break the building up more. You need to do this. You need to do that. So we'll see.
That's your strategy. The other thing is, David said something about raising the ground floor and the level of the ground floor. I took a note here, and I think it's very successful in terms of the main floor of the building is elevated from the street.
Yep.
Landscaping, good criteria, go for it.
Yep. Makes sense to me. David, do you have any questions?
No, none at all. And I take the comments, and I was just joking about the Terrytown buildings. I particularly don't like them much. But the comments about buildings that try to, all too often we see houses that have it's a collection of gables. It's almost like there was a fire sale on gables, and everybody had to put as many of as they can on the front elevation. And it just means there's just a whole bunch of whole bunch of potential leaks are going to happen over time, and it looks terrible because you look at the general, basically all the vernacular of your very elegant buildings. They generally very simple, maybe one or two articulations with a single almost one roof, and maybe there might be a gable, but there isn't a whole lot of additional other folds and things like that with the roofs. And so I think the comments relative to the stairs in the front, those are very welcomed, and I think that it can be simplified, and it should be simplified so that you can kind of see if there are three different parts of this building, that there are three different parts, and clearly articulated, so that the two major portions can kind of stand out.
Right.
I think the idea of trying to match the two ends and making the middle one as a separate material might be definitely worth exploring. I don't know who mentioned that, but that might be more successful than what you have here. So it'll really act as the separator then. If you have time, I would explore that, Patty.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I think that really, now I can't look at it the way it is without wanting to change it.
There you go. Okay, so if you have time, I would explore that and see if you can do something with settling down those couple of roofs in the front.
Yep.
And you might have, something that you can evolve from that.
Yeah, I think that sounds exciting.
And the left side really looks attractive. I think the proportions on that work with, maybe a little bit on the roof.
Yep. Cool.
Okay.
Great.
I appreciate it, guys. Thank you for coming all the way in just for this one meeting.
I guess
Nobody drove too long.
we have to vote to continue this application, right, John?
We can continue it, and because we'll see what they say at the AHRB, at the planning board, and that might, lead us to coming back and discussing at the next meeting.
All right. So the other, on that, we leave it for the planning time. So I make a motion to continue this application. Do I have a second?
Second.
50 seconds, all in favor. Thank you, guys. Thank you for the comment. Thank you, David and Patty. And
Thank you for your time.
We'll see you on
Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Night.
Thank Jennifer for doing such a wonderful job.
Good night, guys.
Take care.
Nice.
Have a good night.
So any more comments, anybody? Any updates?